Good evening. How's everybody doing today? Good, good. We still have a little bit of a line outside, so we're going to hold off for just a few minutes, so bear with us. Thanks for coming tonight. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I think we've got everybody in the room now. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. Tonight we're talking about the South Douglas Overlay Project. How many of y'all have been to a meeting in the past? Our last one was in just around end of October, November. Okay, so some new faces. A lot of ones have been here, so good. Again, Jared Schneider with Kimley Horn helping out the city on the study. I've got Philip DeMaria. It's going to be helping us with this presentation. We've got a number of elected officials here as well. I just wanted to announce they're just here to kind of listen on the conversation. We've got Commissioner Tornga, I think right there, yep, Freeney, and then Kynes, I believe, is here as well. Thanks for supporting and coming out tonight. Also in the back, you'll see where we had our kickoff or our sign-in area. We had two of our staff members as well. I think they're hiding back there. Chad Davis is back there, as well as Monet. Also happy to have George Kinney with the city here, as well as Molly Card. So we'll talk a little more about that as we get through the presentation. Tonight we want to give you a little bit of information. Talk about this. The purpose of tonight is really an update on the overlay. So a lot of y'all have heard kind of some similar concepts, and you've seen some of that in the back, but we're going to talk about what we've been up to since kind of the end of October, early November. But also want to provide you a little bit of information for those that haven't been aware. So we are going to take a step back, talk about the concepts, and then we'll kind of show you a little bit more about what we've been up to. So we're going to talk about 15, 20 minutes. Our thought here is to kind of get through the presentation and then have some questions afterwards. And then everyone should have a handout. If you don't have a handout, we've got plenty in the back. So we're going to talk about those concepts. And then we're also going to kind of explain the handout. So ready to get going? All right. Thanks so much for coming. You guys always show up. This is great. You never know nowadays, really. So really quickly, I kind of went over this. We're going to give you a recap. Tonight's purpose is to give you an update of the South Douglas Overlay. We're going to talk about a little bit of the outreach events, what we heard in the end of October, November. I'd like to tell you kind of, all those sheets that we get and all the information that we do receive. We really do look at every single line. So Philip and I and the team summarize that, and we'll kind of give you a recap of that real quick. And then we're going to provide kind of the next steps of where we're going here. So really over the next few months is where we're going to be going and kind of finishing up this overlay, or the development of the overlay. So where did this all start? We've talked a lot about this in the past, and for some that are new, that this won't be revolutionary for you. It's really the area we're looking at is in this kind of this red area here. Oop, just hit the wrong button. I knew I was going to do that. There we go. So we're kind of in that red dashed area, quite a bit south of downtown, and really it's been the development pressure that's been happening over years, right? And this isn't new. This is stuff that we're seeing all throughout Pinellas County and around the country right now. It's areas that are adjacent to downtowns and activities, and you receive more and more pressure. So really it's development that's kind of moved south. It doesn't fit the characters and the character of the area. And really, we'll talk about some of the specifics. In the 1980s, there was adjustments to zoning. So a lot of this area, really the impact is it was rezoned for multifamily. And so you can do multifamily south of downtown up to 5 stories in some areas, up to 3 stories in some areas. The single family, you can do 2 stories. So a lot of what we've been hearing is really the issues with height or concerns about height or the big homes that don't match the character. So we'll describe a little bit more about that and want to make sure we're hitting all the components. So why, some of you are specifically here, have some specific questions about what the city is calling right now is the zoning in progress. And really that was to identify and look at, let's put a hold on some types of development within this area. And this runs through the end of 2022. And so there's some standards that we wrote in white. Some of y'all might not be able to see that, but it talks about anything over a single story, new construction or development that exceeds a single story. There's a hold on that right now. New construction or development that does not include more than a single dwelling unit. And then there's also new construction for different kind of architectural standards. So the whole point that we wanted to make here tonight is that that process is temporary. That was never meant to be interwoven in what we're doing with this overlay. It's just a temporary kind of a stopgap measure for now for us to kind of look at this overlay and get it right. So the second bullet, we said it's related to the overlay, but the standards are not included. Does that kind of make sense? Hope that makes sense. So recap of what we're doing is we're kind of looking at that area I highlighted, and we're looking at kind of the concern of the future development that's really doesn't match the character of the neighborhood. And that, again, we're talking about two main components, height and the mass, the kind of the size, like, it just doesn't fit. So we're trying to address that. And looking at the overall zoning, we're not replacing the zoning, we're coming up with what we call as a character overlay. And we're going to explain that further. Some of y'all have heard this, some of this might be new for you. So what we said is we're developing character overlay for South Douglas by addressing building design. What does that building look like? The compatibility concerns. It's something the city's been trying really hard, is to match compatibility of our neighborhoods and architectural styles. So I kind of hit this already, but a character overlay, what it does is it applies to a specific area and it fits on top of your current zoning. It's not taking rights away, but it provides, it's almost just a different layer that provides more specific regulations. So it looks at the neighborhood compatibility, so that's where we look at styles and home types. Philip, you have anything else to add to that?
Thanks, Jared. Can everyone hear me all right? Great. Yeah, so zoning overlay really, Jared covered it really well, but it's an additional layer. We're taking a focus on a specific geography, identifying it as something special, something that needs additional attention, and then trying to address it through additional regulation, hemming in, and looking at specific items, specific building development regulations that maybe need additional layers and tightening to ensure that compatibility is really focused in on. So that's what we're talking about here tonight, and we're going to get into some specifics here shortly.
And then we always like to show this, what is not. So again, we're not trying to remove the existing zoning, and the city went through this process about 2 years ago in 2019 to look at changing the single family, or the multifamily rather, to single family on certain blocks. You have to get an entire block to agree to do that. And that can take time. So there's a lot of growth happening now. This measure, this character overlay, was really identified as kind of a first look at it. Like, what can we get quickly done? And then, again, this is something the city is going to continue to look at, and eventually there could be some other steps after the overlay. But again, it's just trying to get something done. And it doesn't change the density or the entitlements. It's something you hear a lot of times. It's not as easy, like we could say we don't like 5 stories and we could just remove 5 stories. That's tough to do, right? Folks that bought and had entitlements, they had that expectation. So it's easier said than done. And we like to say it's not a solution for everything. We feel like it's a good first step, good first measure. And this is key for what the city talks about. This is in the future land use element, and really in the comprehensive plan that drives everything the city looks at is compatibility. So it's requirements for the area, and it really talks about the compatibility of preserving the neighborhood character. So that's something that this overlay is really trying to achieve, that the policies that the city set forth of creating compatibility within the surrounding land uses. So now we're going to kind of step into 3 main components. I'm stealing your thunder here, aren't I, Philip?
Oh, you're doing
3 main buckets of the overlay. Again, some of you all have heard this, so bear with us, but then we're going to dive a little bit deeper. Again, what I want to kind of reemphasize is this is to give you an update of where we're at with the overlay. It's not done yet. We're just giving you kind of an update of what we've been doing.
Again. So just to rehash a little bit on the comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan is basically your blueprint for development in the city. It guides future land uses, it guides transportation, it guides housing choices, it guides infrastructure choices. And all of that's supposed to blend together in a way that leads to coherent and cohesive land use decisions and choices made by city staff moving forward on a long-range horizon. So compatibility is a key part of that. And if I asked each of you to define compatibility, it'd probably be a different answer for each of you. There's a joke about, I know it when I see it. That goes for compatibility. So what we've attempted to do as part of this overlay is really define it, codify it, right? Which is just as difficult as defining it. We've taken the approach of basically a three-pronged method, a three-legged stool that you see here. So a daylight plane, and really focusing on orientation of homes, and then architectural requirements. The daylight plane really addresses the mass and height, what you might define as bulk of a home, bulk of a structure, paying attention to the edges and how it impacts surrounding properties. So think of compatibility that way. The orientation of homes focuses on neighborhood character. When you walk into a neighborhood, you might find that all the doors face towards the street, all the windows face towards the street rather than just having blank facades of walls. Those lend itself to neighborhood character. And then architectural requirements. The city did a fantastic job close to 10 years ago of really defining a lot of the key architectural styles found within the city and attempted to find ways to support those architectural styles moving forward by looking at details like roofs and the materials used on walls, the way windows are oriented and the sort of casements used around them. I'm not an architect. If you're an architect in the room, I apologize. I may have said something that you didn't like, but that's the best I can do to define it. But those are the three legs of that stool of what we're trying to focus in on as far as defining compatibility, specifically in the South Douglas area. There are a few ideas you're going to see here. We've explored some additional methods and some additional ways of applying some of these legs of the stool that you'll see here shortly.
And I'll just add, so you see a number 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to dive into those components, and particularly the daylight plane. Again, we're going to back up, explain what we mean by that a little bit. And a lot of what we heard in October was provide some more examples. So we started to show and kind of look at some specific examples in the area and outside of the area of how this could be applied. And then I just want to note there's other components that we're going to address that have been discussed, and we just had a City Commission workshop a few weeks ago where we talked about the process and the clarity of like how is this going to look, how is it going to get rolled out. We talked about that zoning in place or progress being done in April, so May, what happens? So there's going to be a little bit of a process. We're looking at lot combination suggestions, like that's where folks are combining lots. So that's going to be part of the overlay, and then the parking is another issue. So just wanted to make that known. But again, you're going to see 1, 2, 3, and we're going to start. Let's get to it. Let's step in it.
Great. Thanks, Jared. So the first one is this concept of a daylight plane. Some of you may have heard this before, may have seen this graphic before. This was really our first attempt at addressing two problems. The first is, what does it look like at the edges of a property boundary if the lot line runs from the ground straight to the sky, and here are two buildings on either side of that property line? How do they operate within the property, and how do they treat this sort of shared area in between? Although both pieces of the area, both halves of that area, the setbacks are owned by two different folks. And this concept of a daylight plane is essentially creating an angle in which you cannot build outside of a setback area. So this addresses areas above a first floor that would create maybe casting shadows on someone else's property, or maybe blocking out the sunlight to another person's property. Really addresses privacy as well as how large the homes can be close to these property lines. So this first concept is measured directly from the property line. You can sort of see a triangular plane, if you will, that comes over each property. And it is, once again, measured from the property line. That's going to be a key concept moving forward. The chart on the right, other than being a little confusing, is an attempt to address differing lot sizes. So we've heard a lot about how lot combinations have created areas in which large structures can be built similar as if they were on a small lot. And those are two different situations and two different ways of applying some sort of compatibility concerns. And what we've tried to do here is create different angles, a different daylight plane angle, based on how wide your lot is. So the wider the lot, the flatter the angle, which of course pushes some of that developable building envelope closer to the center of the lot. So it is somewhat flexible. I know it's a little convoluted, but the idea is that if you have a wider lot, you are encouraged or required to build closer to the center of your lot and concentrate the mass of your home or your apartment building closer to the center of your lot. If you have a smaller lot, those restrictions are somewhat relaxed because, of course, if you have a smaller lot, you have a smaller amount of land area that you can really develop. So I'm seeing some nods, so I think we can move on to the second example. Well, as a proportion, yes. But as a general floor area, no. No, you would have a, correct. I'm sorry. We're going to take questions and answers in a little bit, but I'll repeat myself, though, just to make sure that we understand this. So the larger the lot, the flatter the angle. So as a proportion, certainly you're going to have less height in which you can move when you're close to the edges of your lot. However, if you have a smaller lot, those restrictions would be somewhat relaxed so that you're not encumbered by having a smaller lot. No, sir. No, sir. We'll take questions in a little bit, but there is no maximum square footage within the current ordinance as written. So we'll move on. Okay, so this next slide really talks about general comments here that we've received over the course of our public input meetings.
Yeah, so this is the last meeting that we had in October, and some of what we're describing here is just some of the highlights from what we heard. So we just had this conversation a little bit. We heard, do you have an impervious surface or open land percentage? Some talked about that, so, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Some talked about how does it apply to a corner lot. So we're really looking at the side setback with this daylight plane. And then non-compliant structures, how will those be addressed? So that's getting into the process, how will the process work? So those are some things that we're working on. The concerns, yeah, right there on the bottom, you just mentioned it, limiting the square footage and development rights. So that was something that we definitely took note of and heard quite a bit. And then we wrote something down here where is the overlay concept scalable? Others talked about could it be applied in other parts of the city? And yes, that's what we're looking at, is providing a process where it could be done in other areas. So.
Great. So what we've done here in these next couple of graphics that you'll see, because one of the questions and concerns that we got in our last input meeting was, how does this actually apply? Show us some pictures of how this would apply. So what we've attempted to do in this particular graphic.
I'll say this is not Dunedin, so don't start trying to guess where this is. It's close by if there's a clue there.
One of your sister communities. We took a structure that is obviously incompatible, right? It's sort of, I don't want to say comical, but you see it. This is one of those times where you say that's obviously incompatible. You have single-family structures that have a lot of character. Maybe they look like they were built in the 20s, maybe even earlier. And you have a person who's purchased a 45-foot wide lot between two historic homes and built up approximately 40 feet, right? On a 45-foot wide lot. And so what we've done is taken the proposed daylight plane ordinance that you saw on the previous page and outlined that angle in yellow. And we can flip through this slide here. That'd be a 65% daylight plane. And you can see how that building would be clipped and how that developable area would be constricted on the lot as it moves higher and higher. So this particular building, as it is shown, would not be permitted within the South Douglas area if this daylight plane was adopted.
I think what it's trying to tackle, this is the big elephant in the room, I think, that everybody fears, where it's the multifamily, where you could do 3 or 5 stories. So that's what this is trying to address. Want to move on?
Great. So this is that same exact same sort of scenario where you have a 45-foot wide lot and a building that has been built and constructed within that triangle, if you will, in that prism. And in order to fit with sort of sensible ratios and sensible height and an actual buildable way, we found a building height of 22 feet that would fit within. So this daylight plane wouldn't preclude this sort of structure, and it still pays close attention to the areas within the setback. So one concern that we heard when we first presented this first type of daylight plane, where the angles were taken from the property line, was that it was a little bit confusing. So we did some additional research. We went back to the drawing board, and we looked for opportunities to maybe simplify what daylight planes really are. So this second example, this is a brand new example that we're showing you here. This daylight plane is measured at a point that is set back from the property line. So this is that 10-foot setback. And you'd go directly up to a specific point. I think here we have it at 20 feet, Jared?
Yeah, that's actually 20 feet. You're right.
Right. And then from there, it'd be a 45-degree angle. And that would apply to any lot regardless of the lot width. So there was some concern about if you have a large lot, that meant that you couldn't build as much. This one is agnostic towards lot width. It is simply, you have your setback, you go up to a specified height, in this case 20 feet, and then from a 45-degree angle, you are measured. And that still pays some attention to the side yard and allows some level of daylight to come through. And the current maximum building height as defined by the city of Dunedin is the midpoint of a hip or gable roof, and that's shown here at 27 feet. In purple, you can sort of see how this particular building would be clipped. So it would still require some adjustments towards the center of the home to be permitted by right.
Yeah, and I think that the thing I'll add here is, like Philip said, we went back to the drawing board, and this is a similar concept we're seeing more and more. There's a couple communities in Florida and then outside of Florida too that are doing this. And Philip, I think really the reason why is the 45-degree. You don't need a protractor like we've joked in some of the city commission meetings. It's simpler. You look at the current setbacks that you have in your home today, you follow those setbacks, then you go up the 20 feet that Philip mentioned, and it's a 45-degree angle. So that's partially why we're seeing that in other cities.
Right. And now after I step back, I realize that we said 15 feet here as the daylight plane height.
Yeah. Well, you asked me. And
that's right. So this is that exact same sort of scenario, and it shows a current structure on site and how it fits within that envelope. But once again, all we're doing with these daylight planes is defining a different building envelope than what exists today. And we're going to show you in a moment what exists today. And it's really not, I describe this as a trapezoid or maybe half of a stop sign or octagon. Today, you have a rectangle. And so it doesn't address any of these areas close to your neighbor's property lines.
And the point this one's trying to make, if you can tell, it's a little cut off, and this is a quick sketch, but on the right and the left, you have one-story homes. This is actually kind of just south of downtown. And so what it's trying to show is it's hard to tell from the perspective, but that bulk isn't, like Philip said, it's not a square, so the bulk is in line with what's surrounding it. Even though it's a two-story, you don't have that bulkiness that's right on the property line.
Right, so as I mentioned previously, we wanted to give you an example of what the regulations on the books are today. And that's sort of this rectangular prism that exists. You can build anywhere within this box. And this isn't to scare you. This is pretty typical across Florida, across the United States, because it's predictable. And a lot of land developers both prefer predictability, and it allows for a certain level of a structure to be built without any sort of attention given to architecture or slanting lot lines or anything like that. So this is what's on the books today in the current zoning within the South Dunedin overlay area, the 35-foot maximum building height.
And that's, again, like Philip said, not to scare y'all, but that's for, again, the elephant in the room, that's multifamily. If you were going to do single family, you couldn't go up to 3 stories or 35 feet. It's 27 feet. So, but with this, we're trying to address the advent that somebody wants to do multifamily. You're not going to get that bulky kind of square. And so what then happens is it still looks pretty big, right? But what we're transitioning to is the concept that Philip just presented, where you have the setback, and then you have, and I think the perspective makes it look bigger, but you have still the 35 height, but it's scaled off of the home that's next to it. And again, this is south of downtown, in that MF 7.5 area, right by the Pinellas Trail. We heard this a little bit already in the discussion tonight, and this isn't a concept we're presenting tonight, so now we're transitioning a little bit. We showed you 2 different examples of a possible daylight plane application. The other thing that we've heard in recent meetings, and we looked at pretty early on, was that this is, and I don't expect you to read this is what St. Petersburg does outside of their historic areas. I don't know if anybody's been to historic Northeast or all along Kenwood, very similar neighborhoods in some ways, but they have a maximum, what they call residential intensity allowed on parcels, or maximum residential building coverage, so they'll actually give you a percentage. So it's another way to get at it. It doesn't necessarily address the height, like the daylight plane, and in some ways they do that, right, Philip? But it's giving you a straight up percentage, and somebody talked about square footage. It could limit your square footage. So I'm talking about that. I'm not trying to throw out a lot of different concepts and ideas, but this is I want to give you an update. It's something that we're thinking about. We heard about it at the last commission workshop, and so we're talking about it. There's definitely cities do that throughout. We've worked on codes that do that as well.
Right. So. And I'd say that, to the gentleman's comment earlier about limiting building square footage and limiting the size of homes and that sort of thing, and actual square footage of a home, this is done in certain communities. It's not done in Dunedin, but it is a tool used by certain communities to limit the actual size of homes. It's saying, look, if you've got a 50 foot wide lot, you can only build a 1,900 square foot home on it, and that's that. So it's important when we do these sort of analyses to really focus on what other sister communities are doing. Pay attention to them, see what's working, what isn't, and seeing what might make best sense for Dunedin.
And there's a related question to this in the handout, so definitely wanted to talk about it. But again, we're still kind of going through that concept. So now we're going to transition a little bit. Remember, we talked about kind of three main elements of this overlay. We hit on the daylight plane again, where we're trying to really hit the height and how do we transition on homes next to each other. The second big piece of this is really the building design, and we'll go through these next two much more quickly.
Definitely. Thanks, Jared. I mentioned some of these concepts earlier, but really what we're focusing in on when it comes to building design, specifically not architecture, is what makes a neighborhood a neighborhood. These are residential areas, primarily single-family homes. There's a good mix of multifamily housing, but how can we make this feel more like a cohesive neighborhood? These three elements on screen, orientation, garage and carport placement, parking, and building elevations are three ways of reinforcing that this is a neighborhood. And so I'll run through these quickly. Orientation is really focusing in on facing the street, making sure there's windows and doors facing a street. If you're on a corner lot, there's some level of flexibility so that you're not penalized. Garage and carport placement. If you go to a lot of brand new subdivisions, you're going to see a lot of what folks call snout houses, where you have a garage right up against the street, sort of, and then the front door set all the way back. It doesn't lend itself to what you typically see in the South Dunedin area. So we want to reinforce that front doors should be placed a little bit closer than garages or take prominence on a home. And then finally, building elevations, and that incorporates window placement, where roofs are, that sort of thing, in a general sense. And then the third leg of the stool has to do with architectural styles. And so a lot of this has to do with some homes being brought to the neighborhood and being built in the neighborhood that really don't fit in. And I'm not a person to say whether or not that's a good thing or bad thing, but it definitely doesn't lend itself to a character overlay where your primary goal is compatibility and enforcing or regulating some level of character and supporting that character. So what we've done is taken a look at the existing stock of homes within this area. We've cracked open the Cooper Johnson book that's on file with the city of Dunedin, and we've identified 4 or 5 styles that really make the most sense in this area, which you can see at the bottom of the page here. The most prevalent style in the South Dunedin area is this mid-century ranch concept, and that's just a one-story kind of block structure. You see a ton of them. They're really prevalent, and we want to make sure that we're supporting that architectural character. Craftsmen are another sort of home type that you see a lot in Florida in general, but specifically in this area. Coastal vernacular, Mediterranean revival, French Creole, and Anglo-Caribbean are all styles identified in the architectural handbook on file with the city, and we've identified all of those as being consistent with the character of South Dunedin.
And I'll add on too. Bill hit on it. A lot of what we're talking about is just what it's called the standards under there. Do you have a porch? Does your neighbor have a lot of these blocks already have porches, or certain windows are facing certain ways, roof lines, windows, and doors. So it's really trying to keep consistent in that compatibility. But I know there's a lot of discussion on compatibility. It's really the standards we're after. And to that notion, wow, this is us here in October. I think y'all have doubled. So kudos to you guys. But yeah, so the range of responses, nobody has anything to say about home styles, and that's my sarcasm. A lot of different folks talked about traditional styles, some want more flexibility, so there's this balance we're trying to strike. Some talked about the modern style, and so we're trying to reemphasize those standards. Really, I think, and this is where we're trying to strike that balance again of not adding too much restriction, but adding, again, there's a character here, so we're trying to enforce that and focus on the size and the character. So this is, now we're kind of transitioning out of the 3 stools and just or those three main items and wanted to talk about something we heard quite a bit. So we got a slide or two that summarizes the October workshop again. And I think a lot of what y'all were talking about is a well-defined process and transparency. I know there's a number of folks that are just waiting to see what happens and are frustrated. So again, just kind of hold on. This is going through April, and then there will be a defined process after what happens after that into May. Again, we talked about this ad nauseum probably for y'all tonight, mixed feelings on multifamily. So we're trying to balance that you already have multifamily and how do we fit the character of that multifamily if it occurs. Desire for more information, that came up quite a bit. I know we talked a lot about Edgewater and how that's a little bit different. So I think there's going to be some more work on that, and there's little kind of nuances of how Edgewater is just a little different with the bigger setbacks. Concerns on the bottom, again, we talked about compatibility and character. If you have like a corner lot on two sides, how do you address that? So those, again, just updating you that those are some of the things we're working on, and love to talk more about that tonight with y'all. Yeah, I think a lot, again, these are kind of talking about the city review and variances. So this is really, the overlay is meant to be a tool for the city to utilize and to review future development coming in. So next steps, I kind of went over that. Where we're headed is we've got the meeting tonight, obviously, and we're really working towards the end of April. So we've got several other public meetings that y'all are obviously welcome to participate in and want to have a robust discussion tonight. We're going to refine what we're working on through the month of March. We've got the LPA, that's March 9th. And then we've got commission first meeting, and that's tentative, by the way, March 9th. And then we have a commission first reading April 7th, scheduled for that time frame. And then the second reading 21st of April. So we're going to be really working on this quite a bit through the month of February and March, and then through April. So with that, I think we're here for some questions. And I want to say, we're going to take questions, but we've got your handout. And did everybody get a handout, by the way? If you don't have a handout, please raise your hand, and Chad in the back and other city staff can get that for you. So that's the local planning agency. That's yeah. Yes, sir. Oh, I got confused. I asked you to raise your hand, and I think Carl's got a question.
How do you handle the daylight plane in lots that are in a floodplain? And we have a number of lots in the overlay district that are in a floodplain, and many of those lots have one-story mid-century homes. So what do you do? Do you raise that envelope up, or what?
Funny you should ask that question. I knew you were going to come up with that question. And I'll say what we're showing in these diagrams is a simplified version. There's kind of, and I'll have Phil jump in a little bit more, there's a more detailed version of obviously what happens to the height when you have, yeah, your floodplains.
So I would expect the draft that comes before the LPA and eventually the City Commission to have language that speaks about how daylight planes begin at base flood elevation or base flood elevation +2, depending on the FEMA velocity zone. Sure, sorry. What that means is the triangles and the daylight planes and the angles used would begin at what's called base flood elevation. And base flood elevation is defined by FEMA as really being the location where in a 100-year storm event would be the high water level that occurs in a coastal area. And so typically most building codes and most zoning codes address this base flood elevation by saying that the finished floor of a building needs to be base flood elevation +2 feet. And that gives them some sense of resiliency, as well as minimizes risk of property damage and potentially loss of life. Yes, sir. So the question is, how do we intend to address lots that are wedge-shaped? The way we're thinking about it is that what we're addressing are side setbacks. Front setbacks and rear setbacks are typically deeper. You'll see a lot of 20-foot front setbacks, 20-foot rear setbacks, and then shorter side setbacks, 7.5 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet. So wedge-shaped parcels already have those side setbacks taken from the property line. We would continue with that line of thought. No pun intended, I guess. But with option one? Right. Right. And that's what occurs today. Correct me if I'm wrong. Sure. Right. Parallel to your front property line?
To your side property line.
Correct. So, okay, understood.
So as we move back, your option one increases the requirement for setback.
Oh, understood.
Because the lot is varying in width, it gets wider as it goes backwards. It increases, it makes
Understood.
no sense.
No, that's a great comment, and that's really good feedback. Let's make sure we take that down. So I'll repeat it for folks. So the question is, on lots that have varying widths, so let's say 50 feet at the front property line, and then maybe 20 feet on the rear property line. How do you address the daylight plane, or how does the daylight plane work and function in a sensible manner as that pie shrinks? In option one, we showed a variable lot width, or a variable angle to the daylight plane as lot widths grow and shrink. And the gentleman brought this up as a concern. I would say that, from a conceptual level, it should follow what is at the front property line. But that's not a particular issue that we've codified quite yet. So that's a great comment. We'll make sure that we address that. Thank you. Absolutely.
So my question is less for you and more for the city commissioners. And my question is this: why are you here? Because over the last 10 years, our neighborhood has been bombarded with the request to change our zoning. They come to us every year or two, I want to change your zoning. What do we say? Thank you, but no thank you. Okay, now we're not going to change your zoning, you're just going to volunteer to change your zoning. No one volunteers. Okay, now we're going to do historical preserves. No one wants historical preserves. Now, what are we doing? Overlays. Okay? And the first thing out of your mouth is we're not going to change your zoning, but the first thing on your slide is I'm going to change your setbacks, which absolutely changes my zoning, sir. And when you show problems, and you can't even show pictures of my city where the problem is, then I have to say, I don't have this problem. And by the way, my neighborhood has character, and it has character because I don't have the same house as my neighbor, and my neighbor doesn't have the same house as me. Okay? And I get to have a non-conforming house, and they get to have a non-conforming house. Because what makes a neighborhood is the people in this neighborhood. Not the buildings, and not the rules, and not the restrictions. And the idea that you would tell me that I'm going to keep my zoning, but you're going to put layers and layers and layers of rules and restrictions on my building, I don't want my zoning anymore because you just destroyed it. You took away all my things. When you're going to tell me I can't have the right door, when you tell me what kind of roof line I have to have, when you tell me I can't keep my square are my rights. They're my property rights. It's what preserves my property values, and it's what makes my community my community. So I don't want you to answer this because I know your answer, but I can tell you, the city commissioners, we don't want this. My neighbors don't want to lose their property rights, and my neighborhood doesn't want to lose our property values.
That's what I like about this community, passion. Thank you. Let's go in the back. Oh, sorry, he's kind of leading it, I guess.
I got a teacher voice, so I can use it. I respectfully disagree because I do appreciate the character overlay. I'm very grateful for the character overlay and its development. My question is, I do have one of the smaller bungalows, which I recently bought in the last 5 years. So I like our neighborhood. I want it to kind of stay the same. But my question is, what about homes that have on the corner? Does the daylight overlay address houses that are on a corner? For instance, my neighbor has a big double lot on a corner, which if he does go up, I'm in the cave all day, every day. So when you're looking at the overlay, does that address homes that are on side streets that might be neighboring, that are on the corner lots?
Yeah, sure. So that's where we talked about it addressing the side setbacks. If you're on a corner, it would address that side street here and then here. And that's why we really liked kind of that second option, because it started to look at the existing setback. You already have existing setbacks in your zoning, so it applies to the existing zoning that's there today and just builds off of that a little bit. So yeah, definitely something that we're looking at fine tuning. I think I'm going to let the gentleman with the mic, you want to?
Yeah, I'll just kind of work our way.
Yeah, you want to? And hey, while we're waiting, one thing I want to say, that's why we have this handout. So I'm being serious when I say please fill out that. So we've got we've just heard two different opinions. Fill out that handout because we will be reading every single comment. So please do that. I know not all of you can speak in this forum. Otherwise, we'll be here till 2 in the morning. Where do we go with the mic?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for being here. Quick 2 minutes on my statement. Over the last 10 years, I've heard words such as redistricting, zone in progress, redevelopment area, specific geography, variances of compatibility, and such terms I find are being codified in the comprehensive plan as part of a process involved. One word that I find deliberately omitted in such process would be the word jurisdiction in the establishing of water jurisdictions. Omitting our outdated sewer and water infrastructure in such disinformation, focusing in on our daylight planes of our rooftops, neglecting the fact that our water pipes are 75 years old, is an atrocious act of this display tonight. I feel as though we need to focus in on what's most vital to us right now, and that would be our sewer and water infrastructure, and the disinformation and disfocus being given by this board tonight is in question. Thank you.
I want to focus it on kind of the concepts we've heard tonight. Yes, sir.
Hi there.
Oh,
So I'm actually in a bungalow, 1,000 square foot bungalow, and next to me is a 6,000 square foot house happening right now. 2 doors down from me, they're finishing up another house. And, I grew up in this area. I'm not against growth. I went to all middle, high school, Dunning Middle, was in the first Mardi Gras with a couple of my high school girlfriends. My mother had a store in downtown Dunedin. So none of us are against growth. I think it's strategic growth and resident, what's the word I want to use? Resident mindfulness growth. I'll tell you, in my experience, it's been 3 years of hell. You've got one code enforcement here at the city of Dunedin, one code enforcer. Okay, so I've lived between 2 portalettes. I've lived with constant noise. I've gone through 3 AirPods. My dog ate them. New headphones. ear pods. It's a lot. It's a lot. And so I think that managing growth rather than focusing on growth is important. Now, yes, my house has appreciated, and I'm grateful for that. It is a 90-year-old house, and I bought it 11 years ago. But I don't want to move. My community, definition, friends, family, everybody's here. So yes, maybe I could leave if I don't like it, but I'm having my voice being heard and telling what I can do instead of just complaining about it, because it is maddening. So my point also would be something that's never addressed that I ever hear is who's thinking about what's going on underground, i.e. sinkholes. City of Dunedin's known for sinkholes. I grew up on a sinkhole. So I think it's nice that we all are here talking about the beautiful overlay, but I think it's important we need to be addressing the underlay and what's going on underneath. So I really appreciate all of this. I think it would have been nice to have before, honestly, before what I have walked through. Now I want to Airbnb it, multi-unit it, whatever. Let me make the money off of it instead of the outside investors. I mean, so honestly, that's just what all I can do is use my voice. And I love Dunedin, but it's not a community when nobody lives in the homes. It's constant construction, and that doesn't feel like community to me.
Thank you.
Somebody take this. It's in my way. Thank you. Everybody hear me? monstrosity that's on Albert Street at Broadway, I would take each and every one of you to the Black Pearl for a nice dinner. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that. It is an endless stream of people standing on the corner of Broadway and Albert, looking at that home. Now, to some people, and I'm sure the gentleman back there that was passionately talking about property rights and individual rights, he feels that this home is the best thing since sliced bread. But it is a travesty of epic proportions for me and most everybody that's sitting in here. And I'll tell you, it's enforcement. And a lot of people have asked me, they say, Dale, what's the answer? What is the answer? And my only answer is this. An architectural design review committee is great. It's fantastic. I want you, I want you, I want you, and I want you, and I want you to be the chairman of the Architectural Design Review Committee because I want you at my back. Why do I want you people? Because you live here. You live in the historic residential area. You have a vested interest in the historical residential area. All of this stuff is not going to work unless we have enforcement. And to me, the city of Dunedin, with their Architectural Design Review Committee, has failed me. And it's failed a lot of you people. Okay?
Sir.
Everybody on our street, it's a failure. Whoever stands...
Sir.
One thing, sir, please don't say you speak for most of us, because you're not speaking for me. Amen. There are many others that you're not speaking for. Amen.
So we're gonna move on. I'll ask that folks please use the mic in the middle of the room. Gentlemen, make sure there is one other just general public service announcement. This is being broadcasted on Facebook, and unfortunately, we all can hear you in the room, but unfortunately, the folks online can hear us as we're speaking into the mics. So thank you.
I just wanted to address something that I think's really being overlooked at every meeting the city of Dunedin has. When you look at it and we try to form all this stuff, we only have the older generation here. There's nothing wrong with that. My business is based on the older generation. I've been in this area for 50 years now. I've seen pretty much everything in the last 50 years. All the complaints that I hear in my business dealing with thousands of customers is, I don't like the new Dunedin. They're changing too much. And the people that are saying they like it, but they want more extremes, are the people that have moved in here within the last 10 years. So I think one thing we need to focus on is, A, what do we want as a population in Dunedin? Because I know a lot of these older homes, my kids cannot move into because they've got 3 kids. Okay? So you need a little bigger home. So some of these have to be redone. And I think with us looking at putting everything back to a 1950s, 1960s format of what we look like, things are only evolving. Our economy is terrible. Sickness is going on. Parents, grandparents are living longer. So guess what? I'm going to have to do an addition onto my place so my parents have a place to live because I don't want to put them in a home with Nurse Cratchit. So you got a lot of kids that are moving back home with their young kids. I mean, I think we need to look at the next upcoming generation. I appreciate all the seniors and everything that you've done for us. I just don't think turning this into Mayberry is going to work. So I think we really need to be optimistic and look forward to what's going on.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, provide that flexibility, sure.
Yeah.
All right.
I have a question that I haven't heard you all address, and that's not specific to single-family or even multifamily zoning. Part of the overlay involves the development corridor along Douglas and the form-based zoning areas, which I haven't heard you address how that applies.
Sure. So the FXM, the form-based, is within that boundary, but that's not what we're addressing. We're addressing really 3 zoning categories today, which is the R60, residential 60, the MF15, and the MF7.5. So it's within our area, but we're not really changing or adding anything to the form-based
So
code.
the overlay is not intended to affect the overlay areas? Is that what you're saying?
Not the form-based code area.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct. George, did I hit that right? So the question was, we're not applying or changing anything on the form-based code. And that wasn't the intent of the South Douglas overlay. It's the 3 residential categories that I just mentioned, the R60, MF, that stands for multifamily 7.5, multifamily 15. And those are all in those maps back there. Is that it? Cool. All right, we're going to try to take a couple more. I know everybody wants to chance to
Greetings,
talk.
everyone. My name is Brooke Hartley. I'm a 26-year resident on President. I'm a resident of President for 26 years. And I would like to say that it's been contextually, I've raised my 3 sons there. And on the other side of President Street, the north side was multifamily. And the middle of President Street was the zoning limit for single-family housing. And we do live on the south side of President. And that is why I think maybe they were able to get away with it, what I agree is the monstrosity 1 block away from our house and my church. And but it is historically a multi-zoned area beginning on the north side of President to downtown. And my sons went to North Ward Elementary School, which was zoned for Dunedin between Broadway and President to Sunset Point. And my sons and their friends, which are many who graduated from Dunedin High School, go Falcons.
Nobody?
Yes, come on. Their friends are feeling and saying that they can't continue to live in the hometown that they love, they grew up in. And I feel that if we were able to have additional dwelling units on our huge lots, when we moved to Dunedin, my sister said, "Oh, isn't Dunedin Gaelic for 2-bedroom, 1-bath?" I said, well, we are moving into a 2-bedroom, 1-bath in Dunedin, which has pretty much in our neighborhood, essentially all 2-bedroom, 1-baths that started out at that. I've been in other homes. We all have the same pink tile in the bathroom and the same pink bathtub. And I'm saying that additional dwelling units.
Flexibility?
I'm looking for flexibility so that young people can continue to live in Dunedin and have additional dwelling units between President Street and Union Street in the incredibly large lots. I have a tiny home I have the worst home in the best neighborhood in the county. And I have the tiniest home on the biggest lot in the county. And I can't put a tiny home in the back so my 3 sons who were born and raised here can, maybe continue to live. Or maybe, like my son Maxwell said today, "Oh, Dad, yeah," he says, "I don't want anybody living in my backyard." Well, he's old and crotchety, but Max said,
one more.
Okay, we could maybe, do Airbnb then. Why shouldn't we on the residential side Fenway on the Bay be able to have additional dwelling units. And I'll tell you, the height is not good. When I first moved here, there was no fences between my house and the bay, and then they started putting up fences, and two-story houses we have views from bay, from the bay
Okay, ma'am.
from the front.
We're going to move on. Please write
Okay.
your comments down, too. All right, one more question, then I do want to get to the handout. We're going to describe that.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I just have one observation, and I could be wrong, but craftsman-style homes, there's many of them in the town, and they're beautiful. I think most of us love the craftsman-style homes, as many other styles there are here. Of course, there's round homes in my neighborhood, and trapezoidal homes, and I mean, no, really, there are. We've seen them, right? We're a bit eclectic. There's homes with garage ports connected that are on two different lots and two different owners. We have a little of everything here. But getting back to the craftsman-style homes, I think there's a little irony here because according to your overlay, I don't see a lot of the craftsman-style homes that are here now would not even be able to be built with your proposed overlay rules. How is that? I mean, if we're trying to preserve the craftsman-style homes, and yet your overlay on a two-story craftsman-style home, which there are many of around here, you would not even be able to build them now. So it's an observation. I just want to bring that out. My other point that I need to make.
Please get with me.
It's going to be quick.
Down so I can see.
This one's going to be real quick. We had 270 days, 9 months. I was told by more than one city official, we're having at the very beginning, 2 weeks after this went in, 9 months, but it's going to be done before then. That's just in case we needed it. Well, I patiently waited 9 months. Nothing happened, and now we added another 3 months. And from what I hear you saying today up there, it doesn't even look like a year, which is the extra 3 months, that we're going to have any of this resolved. Now, maybe it's just my problem. Maybe I'm the only one in here. But ironically, I wanted to put plans in 2 weeks before I realized that you put the moratorium in place. And do we have any time frame here at all when we're going to come to any sort of resolution? Or is this just going to drag on for another year? Because my home needs a new roof.
No,
I had to put a tarp on it.
This is the end of April.
What is that?
The schedule's the end of April.
And we're going to get it done? We're guaranteed?
This is an overlay through the end of April.
And then what does that mean exactly? What if we have objections? What if it doesn't get settled? So you've put us all on hold, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that's waiting to build.
That's correct. So as we were talking about, it would go to the commission twice, those 2 dates that we were talking about in April.
I just,
So yeah, look, I know there's some things that need to be ironed out, like you said, and this is kind of
it's unfair. It's unfair, and it's kind of callous by the town to just put people's lives on hold like they put mine, and I'm sure I've spoken to other people the same way. But let me just reiterate. I had to put a temporary roof on my house because I know I'm taking my roof off one way or another when this all gets settled. And it's just not fair to me. So every time it rains, I have to wonder if I'm going to have rain come into my house because 9 months has turned into a year, and I doubt it's even going to be a year. I just want to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seriously, last one, and then we're going to do the handout. Last question.
I'm actually here to make an offer.
An offer.
Thank you for all the work you're doing. I'm a 40-year resident. I own and this goes to the question of the pie-shaped properties. I own a small 1950s home on a pie-shaped property. My setbacks have changed once in the course of my owning the home. And for the last 3 years, I've been trying to figure out a way to make changes to my home so I can age in place. My property will not be, I cannot build an ADU. I cannot get a 35 square foot variance. If I lose my 5-foot easement on the sides of my home, I'm stuck. So I'm offering my property to you all to study in terms of the unique nature and character
I like that.
of some of the things that we deal with in an older community with older homes where the properties are not necessarily square rectangles. So I'll give you my address.
We will
Thank
nerd
you.
out on that all day, so please do.
Thank you.
Can you write that down or come see me,
Yes,
please?
sir.
Okay, thank you all for your patience. I'm not trying to shortchange any comments. I know there's some of y'all that maybe don't feel comfortable, that don't want to talk. We find that quite a bit. So we want to break out the group. And then real quickly, I'm going to talk about the handout. We presented that to you guys. Please come grab somebody if this isn't making sense. This just describes on the first page those 2 daylight plane options that we presented. So you've got Philip, myself, we've got city staff in the back, George, Molly, raise your hands. You guys could probably help back there. Chad from our team in the back. So anyway, this first page kind of describe, oh my gosh, Monet, I'm sorry. Monet's like, where, Monet in the back as well. So you've got at least 6 people, and if you can't find an answer, I don't know, flag us down. Anyway, so this kind of reiterates what we just talked about. And then the next few pages goes into the option 1 we talked about, the option 2, and then, yeah, we want to get your kind of opinion on that, and then the massing that we talked about. So please, please fill this out. We will be reviewing. Thank you guys for coming tonight. You guys always show up. Appreciate it.